Hi, this is Gary Auden, and I'm bringing you an EDUcast, Integrated Customer Experience, Exploiting the Omni-Channel. With me today is Hank Groman, Director of Business Development for a company called the Primas Group. And as we always do, we talk about what we're going to talk about. Here's our agenda. The contact center is changing in many ways. It's never stable. We're going to define multi-channel, and then we're going to talk about omni-channel and contrast the two. I'm going to bring up some statistics that I found very interesting about omni-channel usage. Then we'll talk about how omni-channel will impact both customers and agents. Since omni-channel has multiple media, we're going to ask, how do you find out which channels to select? Then we're going to have an idea of thinking outside the box. And then we're going to talk about something very important. That is getting funding for an omni-channel implementation from your CFO. So let's start off with the first question, Hank. How's the contact center changing? Would you provide some insights for these changes?
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me. Good to be here. Gary, what we're looking at here on our screen is a collection of some of the technologies and the concepts that have impacted the contact center over the years. They run the gamut, affecting operations, people, and processes. Some came along like speech, where it improved customer self-service in the IVR. So customers could more easily get done what they needed to get done. If you think of a contemporary example, think about how easy it is to use speech to book a flight when all you have to do is say city names and not type on your keyboard or phone when you're interacting. Other things that came out like workforce optimization, they improved operations, they improved agent efficiency, that type of thing. If you look at concepts, you had things like first call resolution, voice of the customer, and CX and whatnot. Those came out with the hopes of refocusing the management of the call center from siloed operations, people, process approaches to kind of a unified focus on the customer experience and how to improve that, either through more enabled self-service systems for customers or better passing of that information to agents via screen pop or agent collaboration or whatnot. When it comes to omni-channel, the reason we want to stop and take a look at that is it's one of the solutions that it's not a new term. It's been implemented over the years with varying success. Some have knocked it out of the park. Others have struggled. Some haven't even begun because it can be such a daunting task to implement. So what we see, though, is that it's one technology that you could focus on and try to implement. And if you do it well, it's really not that hard to have an impact on all of those different departments of a contact center, the people, the process, the technology.
You know, we have heard a lot about the multi-channel contact center. It's been around for years, but it does have limitations. Would you go into those?
If you look at multi-channel, what it was a response by a contact center to offer additional channels for a customer to come into the center, which is a good thing from the outset. Traditionally, you had voice, and now you say we want to add email or chat. So you go ahead and you add those channels. If you look at the graph we've got here, you'll notice the vertical columns. The limitation that you run into in multi-channel, and this is what ultimately ended up frustrating customers, was that if you came in through voice, you didn't have the ability to move to email or SMS or social. And you went down the path, you reached an agent, and unfortunately, because the information, the historical information, was not preserved and then shared with agents via screen pop or whatnot, you were kind of stuck in that channel. You know, an example would be that you reached out to a call center on Monday via email. You had made some progress with a support question, didn't complete it. Then you reached out via phone on Tuesday or Wednesday. And unfortunately, once you reached an agent, they had no awareness of your previous interaction. So you had to repeat yourself. You got frustrated, didn't have a good customer experience, which typically bleeds out onto the agent where they're having a frustrating experience and their life is not fun. So good intentions to add additional channels, but not done right, and ultimately ended up in frustration for customers and agents.
Now, we go to the Omni-Channel. I notice you put a bunch of arrows going horizontally back and forth here. What's the versatility you have here that you didn't get with multi-channel?
In short, it fixes the problem I just mentioned, and this is how it does so. First, you have the flexibility to come in through a particular channel, and midstream conversation, you could switch. Let's say you start out chatting with a call center. You realize that it'd be a lot easier to transition to a phone conversation. Well, you could click a button, or the agent could ask you, and you could end up on a phone call with that agent. So there are various examples, too many to go into on this EDUcast, but it's the ability to move between channels midstream. Then supporting each channel, you have databases. You can have a database that maintains all chat conversations or emails, that type of thing. In OmniChannel, what you do is you normalize the data. You integrate all the databases so that they talk to each other, and you have a context database. And the benefit is that can be shared with agents, so that you place a phone call into a call center, the agent gets a screen pop, and on their screen you see a historical picture of your interaction with the call center. They could answer the call and say, "Hi, I see that you've called yesterday, or that you emailed this other day," and they can have access to that context information. So that makes life better for everyone. It makes the customer's life easier, and ultimately the agent's life easier, so that they can provide that good customer experience.
When I was putting together this EDUcast with you, I found 7 channel statistics that I thought would be interesting. I'm not going to go through them all, but when we talk about adults, they prefer digital companies. We find out that people want to have several touch points. People use their smartphones a lot more for this. And you mentioned something else, a statistic which I didn't know about, when you said one company you mentioned to me before we recorded that added chat. It changed the demographics. The company got a number of shoppers who weren't there before. Is that correct?
Yes, there was one company that was looking at making the switch from single channel to multi-channel. What they did was they added web chat. And what they found was that by making that channel available, they had a particular younger demographic that since this younger demographic could communicate in the way they were accustomed to, always being on their phones and whatnot, that their ability to upsell went through the roof. So it went from being a thought of, hey, wouldn't it be great if we added multiple channels to give our customers convenience? It went from that customer experience mandate to, hey, wow, look at what we did to the sales. They went through the roof. So great benefit there.
Let's move forward, because when we talk about omni-channel, we've got 2 groups. The first group that's affected are the agents. Would you make some comments there?
The obvious one would be that omni-channel, when done right, a key point to make is that, and I touched on it a minute ago, is that you need to present that context information to the agent immediately at the time of the call, typically done by either a basic screen pop or an integrated screen pop. Integrated would be when you integrate that information about the customer that you already have to do some kind of intelligent lookup, either into a CRM system or a task management system, and you present that information to the agent immediately upon the receipt of the call or the chat. Or you're empowering your agents so that they're prepared and they can address the customer intelligently. They are able to put the customer's mind at ease, let the customer know that they're aware of the previous interaction, and stop the customer from having to repeat information. So ultimately, they can do their job better, and those results trickle all over the place. You get happy agents, you get happy customers, you get happy agents, you get less churn from agents, less turnover. So this is one of those areas that you're really able to touch all aspects of the contact center and what they're typically looking to address.
Well, that covers the agents, but I think there's also a corresponding set of benefits to the customer.
Yes, and some of these might be obvious, but we've all dealt with contact centers, and you know the frustration of having to repeat yourself. You know when you were in the middle of booking a flight, the phone call got disconnected, you call back, or you were doing a chat for a tech support issue, something happened, you reach back out later, you have to repeat yourself. There's so much frustration and anxiety and stress that comes from that. I know people typically They stress up when they realize that, okay, here we go, I'm going to have to go spend a half hour to try to restart this issue. When you can remove that by preserving conversations, by preserving information and effort that the customer has already invested, you're really making your life better. You're creating loyalty there. You're creating trust. And there are stats that those types of effects result in more sales, in longer customer lifespans.
When we talk about channels, we're talking about multiple media access. How do you find out what channels your customers want?
There are a variety of methods that you can use. Everything from asking your customers, you could easily add on a survey, add that option to either a web survey or a post-call customer survey. You could even have your agents ask for that information from the customer. Another good source is your agents. They'll typically know what customers are calling about, and if you've educated them a bit, you could find out from them, could this have been handled via another channel, which is something that you might have them add to the wrap-up code when they're inputting that data. There is a lot of industry information out there, just tons. If you were thinking about email or chat and you couldn't decide between the two, you'd have to look at your business and who is your age group? What are the demographics you're chasing after? Where's the most opportunity for your business to grow or ease some of the pain of operations? You could find industry reports that are pretty clear about which age groups prefer chat. Interestingly, one recent report actually had a surprising result, and that's that ages between the age of 16 and 24 actually preferred phone for that particular business. And lastly, depending on what industry you're in, it's always great to go check out the competition, see what they're doing, see if you need to Me Too, or maybe there's a technology that you're not a laggard, you could become a leader if you could just jump out there and adopt that before they do and stand out in the crowd.
People always say this, think outside the box, but what do you mean by that?
We imagine most technical teams that would look at OmniChannel, they might get excited about this and they might say, okay, let's go do it. Let's figure it out and just run down the path. But what we caution here is don't go implement just for the sake of implementing. Think through it and get your mindset in a mindset of how are we going to make this successful so that we can get the funding that we need. Based on the research that you've done, if you've listened to your customers, if you listen to your agents, you may have heard some pretty good low-hanging fruit pain points that you could say, yes, if we added this channel, we could definitely increase sales, and there's something that we can go map that out, baseline it now, get the increased sales, and then we can put this in front of the CFO and make a pitch there. There are other issues where you might know clearly based on the agents that maybe you tried multi-channel, you went to omni-channel, but you didn't do it quite right, and now your agents are suffering. So if you could just improve omni-channel, then you could reduce that agent churn, improve operations.
That begs the question, where do you start?
It would depend really on where you are. For those that have single channels, an obvious one would be a multi-channel. If you're only doing voice, you could do chat, and it really wouldn't be that hard. You could do chat via a certain time of day. Go ahead and put a chat window up on your website, offer people the ability to do that, and see if people take that. And maybe even as it impacts agents, maybe you have some offline agents that handle just emails right now. Maybe it's outbound emails. Maybe it's a collections type thing or customer follow-up type thing. If you have offline agents that are doing that kind of non-phone related work, it wouldn't be too hard to go ahead and set up a pilot to get them doing chat as well so that they can handle a mixed environment like that. But ultimately, you do want to look at your technology. If you've identified that there is a vendor path that you can take, that just has a turnkey, out of the box, easy to integrate, easy to get up and running solution, then that might be the path that you take.
When we talk about there's a time frame, this implementation, and what are your thoughts about these questions?
I would say this all depends on the short-term, long-term goals that you have for your contact center. If you're looking to do a pilot, you could do that fairly quickly. Like I just mentioned, if you're going to add chat, that's pretty easy to integrate. You could see if your customers are going to adopt that pretty quickly. You could also do the same with email. But that's depending on the channel selection. Other things that you have to think about are whether this is something that you want to do through a vendor or in-house. We've had conversations with customers who went down the vendor path. They got the technology in, they got the training done, and 3 or 4 months down the line realized that, oh geez, we need an in-house developer just to do this coding that supports this, and we don't even have it. So there can be issues like that where you really need to do the right amount of research up front to understand what's going to be required to make this successful. And the impact that has on time is if you go down a path that does require resources versus one that's out of the box, things can come into play a lot more quickly. There are instances where maybe you do have a good set of in-house resources, maybe you do a lot of coding in-house, so you have overlapping or duplicate resources, and they happen to code on the same coding languages that support some of the platforms out there. Then you're in luck. There may be other cases where you could find a partner that has some middleware, that has tools out of the box, that has pre-built APIs and whatnot, and you could do a partnered approach. So there are many different things that you really need to take into consideration as you map out your expected timeline for a return.
As we always have to deal with as IT people, we have to go to the CFO. Can you give us an idea of some of the justifications you might use with the CFO?
Taking into consideration the points we just touched on, getting feedback from your customers, from your agents, weighing that out. Where could the impact be? Is it going to be an upsell type, where if you add a channel, you can increase sales, or is it going to be a preventative, hey, our agents are suffering, let's go fix that. You take those kind of thoughts and considerations, and then go filter them through your technology. What do you have? What can you most easily adopt and change? You should be able to get a good map of a battle that you could pick, that you could present, hopefully do a pilot or two, and prove out that ROI, and put that in front of your CFO so that you can justify that investment and that spending, and get those funds.
One of the things I'd like to bring forward is I've had to make a lot of these presentations myself. And this is an outline of what I think you should have as part of your presentation. And if I were to summarize all the points here, you have to present the challenges to the CFO, the solutions, the benefits, the value, and the ROI. Talking about functions and features isn't going to make it, all right? And you need to come up with a preliminary budget that the CFO can believe in, but you also have to make sure that you pad it enough so that if you have unforeseen circumstances, you can afford to keep going. Now, Primas is a company most of us have not heard about. Would you talk about Primas and what you have delivered to these companies?
Primas has been around for quite a few years now. We initially started as a consulting firm, helping select call center locations and implement them. During the implementation phase of call centers, we noticed that some of the bottlenecks that would typically happen would be around the customer self-service deployments, where if they weren't scoped correctly and designed correctly, you'd run into issues there. So a practice developed around interactive voice response, IVR. We did a lot of work for some of the big names in the industry, as you can see. We partnered with a lot of the big names in the industry, as you can see. That practice grew into a CTI, computer telephony integration practice, where we did single-site, multi-site screen pops and whatnot. And we actually had a set of tools that we developed over the years that was based on the most requested features from customers. And that tool set has grown and grown. It initially came into the industry as customer callback technology, which actually relied on a virtual queuing database. And that grew into surveys and custom screen pops and repeat caller notification detection and whatnot. And that whole suite has now evolved into a solution that we currently offer to the industry.
Well, let's take a moment to talk about that solution.
We have the most requested Omni-Channel features and more. So what we have, we've got the voice, email, the SMS, we've got different social features, and we do have the ability to pass these conversations between channels, present context information to agents via screen pop. And then below, you can see some of the additional features that we're able to provide along with this, just as one comprehensive suite. Infrastructure-wise, we drop in very easily. We rely on 2 different virtual machines. We can drop into an environment with a context database that has web service enablement, able to speak web to any device that speaks web. And for any of the fun features like customer callback or surveys and whatnot, we use an open source asterisk IVR with pre-built applications. So we actually package this whole solution together in a sandbox that can be test driven and very easy to integrate either on the premise or from the cloud. And one last point to note, worth noting, is that we don't replace any of the existing technology. We could have needed, but we are an overlay solution. So we build on what customers already have and integrate into their existing environment.
Well, I think it'd be very important that people contact you and take a look, especially at the demonstration that's mentioned here. Here's Hank's contact information and the president of the company, Mike Mastro. So I'd like to thank you, Hank, very much for today and the information you've imparted.
Thank you very much for having me, Gary.